Let's get started into spring and summer phosphorus. If some of you have done this before, you'll recognize these bottles. What we are doing here, again, the essential the clip notes is that we send you specific bottles. You go to the deepest part of your lake and you collect a surface sample or a sample of water about a foot or two below the surface of the water. So that's essentially what the protocol is. And now we'll dive in a little bit more. So phosphorus is an important nutrient in lakes. It's an essential nutrient in lakes, and we find it everywhere. It's key to primary productivity, which means it is key to the growth of algae and aquatic plants. Aquatic plants, many of them get their phosphorus from the sediment, whereas algae will get much of get their nutrients from the water column directly. What in our aquatic systems, phosphorus is often the limiting nutrient. And what that is referring to is, let's say, an algae cell requires a host of different nutrients to grow, just like us, to grow, to function, to reproduce. And one of those nutrients, for example, for diatoms is silica. So if I put a whole bunch of silica in a lake in the summertime, it probably won't result in more diatom growth. But if I add more phosphorus, that will oftentimes result, not all the time, but oftentimes result in more algae. And so that's why we call it the limiting nutrient. Now, when phosphorus is in excess, this can cause problems. So this is that cultural eutrophication that can occur. If more and more phosphorus gets put into a lake from human actions in the watershed or on the shoreline, and it's coming in excess, that can create algae blooms. It can create that are undesirable because they might form toxins. They might just be unsightly and have reduced aesthetics. As I mentioned in the first presentation, was that a lot of that growth that happens in the top part of the lake, when there's lots of growth, there's also lots of death. As the algae settle to the bottom of the lake, oxygen can be used up from decomposers. What we've seen is that when there's a lot of algae in a lake, we oftentimes have a economic value impact to our surrounding homes. And this has become a classic picture of Lake Erie, and what we're seeing in green are cyanobacteria blooms. And this is a famous image because what happened in Toledo gets its drinking water supply from Lake Erie, and there was a bloom here that was toxic, and they had to shut it down a handful of years ago, shut down their water intake, which for a city of Toledo size, well, for any town, that's a big deal, but that's a large city that they had to do that for. And this is in part caused by large amounts of or excessive nutrients that are entering into Lake Erie's western basin. Phosphorus is one of those parameters that we use to calculate the trophic status. So is your lake oligotrophic, mesotrophic, or eutrophic? And so, for example, if your lake is oligotrophic, that means you have less than 10 parts per billion of phosphorus in your water, and that leads to clear water, oxygen throughout the year in the lower parts of the lake, and then so on and so forth. As we get more phosphorus, we become mesotrophic, eutrophic, and potentially hypereutrophic. In the CLMP, we collect phosphorus, surface water phosphorus, at 2 times in the year, one in the spring and one in the summer. Spring phosphorus, and just like what we showed for Secchi, we will summarize that for you so you can compare your like, for example, this 2019 number to previous years and to other CLMP lakes, and then also look at it through time. So is the amount of phosphorus changing? So why do we collect phosphorus in the spring and summer? And it's because our lakes change through time and are quite dynamic. So In the springtime, lakes are mixing. And so when we collect that surface sample, we are getting phosphorus that is throughout the entire water column. Whereas when we collect phosphorus in the later summer, we are collecting a surface sample that is more from the epilimnion, the top part of the lake. And well, I'll go into a little bit more detail in my upcoming slides. So in the spring, we are a very mixed environment. So temperature is pretty much the same from top to bottom. Oxygen is the same from top to the bottom. And phosphorus is oftentimes similar or the same from the top to the bottom during this time. When we collect that surface sample, it is representative of the whole water column. And this number helps us understand the long-term buildup in your lake ecosystem. It can be, and it's just a great number. It can now, if you get a large amount of rain onto still a foot or two of snow, that can really influence how much phosphorus is in the spring. But on a normal year with normal snow melt, this is a great representation of phosphorus in your lake. Whereas in the summer, so again, we have warm, low dense water sitting on top of colder, more dense water. The lake is stratified, and so is the phosphorus, or so can the phosphorus. And so when you collect a surface sample like we do in the later parts of the summer, so either August or September, you're collecting from this portion of the lake. And what does that sample really mean? So during the course of summer, what is happening to phosphorus in the water column in the upper parts of the lake is that it's being used. It's being used by algae. It's being chemically bound by iron. And let's say when that algae dies, it holds onto some of that phosphorus and falls through the water column where it goes into the bottom part of the lake. Or iron might, depending on conditions, iron will bind to phosphorus and sink through the water column and build up in the lower part of the lake or in the sediment. And so what's happening is that phosphorus is moving away from the upper parts of the lake. Now, if there is some loading from the watershed, from septic systems, from runoff from the watershed, that's called external loading. And that when we scoop up water here, this can indicate to us, it's to help us understand external loading issues that might be occurring in the water. Now, there's a lot of dynamics happening, phosphorus being recycled and stuff. So it's a helpful value to get an understanding of that. The summer phosphorus sample is also used to calculate trophic status. So let's get into the protocol. And again, we're going to just step through it step by step with a little explanation as we go. So what do you get in the mail if you sign up for spring and summer phosphorus? You get our monitoring instructions, our protocol, our sampling and sample turn-in schedule and locations. So in the spring, we ask that you collect your phosphorus 2 weeks after ice off. That is in a typical winter, springtime here in Michigan. Now this year, if you're in southern Michigan or the southern half of Michigan, it was an abnormal winter and there's barely any ice to speak of. And so as you would have gotten an email from me, we then in these types of years will have special instructions for you. But on a typical year, at least what has been typical, we would ask you to collect it within 2 weeks after ice off. In the summertime, we give you the exact week that you are asked to collect it. And depending on your latitude, so if you're in southern Michigan or northern Michigan, that's what changes. So we also give you, and that's going to be in our sample turn-in schedule. We have a data form for you. We send you bottle labels and then 250 ml sampling bottles with caps on. This is important. Those are the only bottles that can be used. They have been cleaned appropriately to collect phosphorus. The phosphorus testing that is used is very sensitive. And so if we use other containers that have not been appropriately washed, that can skew your phosphorus results. And so you have to use the bottles that we send, and then be careful with getting them dirty, as in don't get them dirty before you sample. Other materials that you as volunteers use will be a cooler bag or a cooler, ice pack, Ziploc baggies, and a pencil or Sharpie. So as I mentioned, for spring phosphorus, we are measuring it during spring mixing. We ask that you determine when ice out is, and then you collect within 14 days of that ice out. Typically in Michigan, it'll be March, April, or sometimes in the UP, May. What is ice out? Ice out, because that can be hard to determine. Ice out is when you can safely navigate to your sampling site, the deepest location on the lake, without having to be unsafe and break through a bunch of ice. It is a surface grab sample, so you are sticking your hand into the water up to your elbow, and this is representative of the whole lake and shows that nutrient enrichment through time. Summer phosphorus, as I mentioned, it depends when you sample, depends on your latitude. Typically it will be in August or September. It is also a surface grab sample in the deepest part of the lake, and this is used to calculate that trophic status. So here is an example of the summer phosphorus collection and turn-in schedule. So for spring, so what to give a glimpse is you collect water in these bottles, and then you freeze it until it can be until a specific date where you drop it off at designated locations around the state. Then that gets shipped to us quickly. We finish the setup and we send it to Eagle Laboratories in Lansing to be analyzed. So all of the lakes that are signed up for phosphorus, what happens again, it goes from your freezer or from your lake to the freezer to our sample drop-off locations, which will then be shipped to us, which we will then drop off at an Eagle Laboratory. So there's a lot of movement of water bottles throughout the summer months here in Michigan with our program. For the spring, everybody around the state will turn in on June 25th. To know where you drop it off depends on your county. Please reference the collection and turn-in schedule that would have been mailed to you. If you do not have it mailed to you, it is on our website under CLMP, so lakes and then CLMP documents. Look for spring and summer phosphorus, and that's where you'll find this schedule. If you do not have the schedule, please email me and I'll send, or if you can't find it, please email me, I'll send it to you. For the summer, it's now becomes more staggered. So here, if you are in Allegan County, if your lake is in Allegan County, you will collect it between September 19th and 23rd. Whoops. You will freeze it, and on September 24th, your turn-in date, you will drop it off at the Eagle Kalamazoo District Office. Here's the address and here's the contact information. And you're dropping it off on the 24th. And then it's different per your county. Sometimes you're not able to make this date. You've collected your sample, but for whatever reason you can't make it. Feel free to reach out to other CLMP volunteers in your area who are going to the same drop-off location. People do that all the time. If you need help coordinating because you don't know who the other CLMP volunteers are, please reach out to me and I'll help with coordination and get everyone in touch to do that. So step one, before leaving your house, fill out the labels. So you are given these labels that you will stick onto the bottle. You write your initials. You will write the date you have collected the sample, your field ID. Remember, that is your unique lake ID. Your lake. In the analysis or parameter code, please write GA. In chemicals added, please leave it blank. Don't put a slash through it. Don't write into it like a note into it. Leave that blank, because what ends up happening is when it gets from your sampling location, when it gets shipped to us overnight frozen, we then thaw them and put in some acid to stabilize the sample. And we then will write that that in there once we add it. So we ask you to do you get 2 bottles, you collect 2 samples. One is the sample and one is your replicate sample. So you collect it at the exact same time, one after another. For that case, you will have one of your labels, everything exactly the same, but in the location, you write REP for rep. So replicate sample. Step 2, you're now going to the deepest part of your lake, your same location that you do Secchi disc water transparency, and you will drift to that part. So drifting is important again, because if you're on a shallow lake and you just dropped your anchor, you can create a sediment plume, and sediment has oftentimes can be primed with phosphorus. And when it's collected in that sample, it will be artificially inflated because you're collecting some of the sediment phosphorus at that point as well. So just like the Secchi, you want to drift in. So if it's kind of a windy day, as you approach your deepest location, you would drop your anchor with additional rope, which will drift over undisturbed part of your lake to collect a sample. Unscrew at this point. Now you can unscrew your cap. Before then, please do not unscrew the cap. Again, if stuff gets inside of the cap or the bottle, that can skew your results. So now you're at your deepest location. You remove the cap and you rinse out the bottle with lake water, lake surface water, twice. So take some water, swirl it around, dump it out. Take the water, swirl it around, dump it out. Be careful with that cap. Now, holding the bottle upside down, so you're holding it like like this. Please don't use a coffee mug. Hold it like this, and then flip it upside down and go up to your elbow or so 1 to 2 feet down, and then you tilt it upward, and it'll go glug, 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 glug. Hold it there until the bottle is full. Bring it up, screw it on, and then repeat right after that with the second bottle. Because we end up freezing this water bottle, we can't have it full because it'll crack the bottle or crack the cap. And at that point, we have to reject the sample. So step 4 is you have the water, the bottle's full, dump out about a quarter of it so that you're 3/4 full. Put the cap back on. So do that with both bottles. Place the bottles in a labeled bag. So you have a Ziploc bag, zip top bag, write the lake name, date, phosphorus, place it in a bag into a cooler. Fill out your data sheets, which I'll show you here in a moment. You'll fold up those, when you're done, make a copy, fold up that copy and put it in another Ziploc bag. This is what our data forms look like. Please fill out everything. So lake, county, township, your field ID number, latitude, longitude, volunteer names. For spring phosphorus, we ask you to note the date of ice out. And any, then when you sampled, and any conditions or notes you would like to put in. Just like on Secchi, on the backhand side, please fill out everything on the back as well, including drawing a map or putting in a map and indicating your sampling location and depth. Now, when you're done with that replicate sample, you do want to head to shore as soon as possible. You don't want to spend a day out on the water and then finally get your samples in. So soon after collecting, head back to your house and put the, what I would say is, so you take your bag that has the samples in there and your data sheet that you folded up in another Ziploc bag, put it inside of there and put it in the freezer. So now they're frozen. When it's time to drop off your samples, so depending on your sampling schedule, you go to your drop-off location and with your samples frozen. So when you transport them, please transport them in a cooler with an ice pack, and then you'll give them to your drop-off location, depending on your schedule. So just want to mention some common reasons for sample rejection is that you collected at the wrong time. So for example, if you are in southern Michigan and you just collect your summer or your spring phosphorus sample today, that is no longer going to be accepted because lakes are starting to become more, we might be entering the beginning of stratification. And so now it's no longer collected during mixing and it's an invalid and skewed number. And it starts to mean something different. And so we won't be able to compare apples to apples through time. Same with summer phosphorus samples is that we give you the window to collect. And if you collect more than a week outside of that, we will reject that sample. Sometimes you can have incorrect delivery. Something happens where it's dropped off at the wrong location or wasn't dropped off at the right time. That can cause problems because this is a huge network of bottles moving and we have to have a schedule ourselves to get things in on time. So if something is coming up and where you aren't able to drop off your samples at the designated location at the designated time, please contact us and we can try to work something out. If your bottles, so this happens, it seems like every year, we forget to dump out a little bit of the water. And so the bottles come to us cracked. And at that point, we will reject that. And the reason why is because now that sample can be contaminated. We don't know that. And so because of that, we reject the sample. Also, please only use the bottles we send you. If you lose them, we can send you more. So please contact Gene Roth or myself. We do not want you to use a old Parmesan container or whatever thing you might have, a pop bottle or something like that. You'll need to use our sample bottles. And just to show, again, the value of long-term data, here is a lake that was collecting in the middle 90s through the 2000s. And again, you're seeing a kind of a fairly stable, but it is a declining amount of phosphorus. And as a key nutrient in a system that can be seen, maybe this lake has been making or let's say there's some agricultural producers in your watershed that are putting in best management practices. It's great to see that then reflected in the data. And the only way to do that is to collect data and look at it through time. So thank you for another parameter down. Are there any questions?
Yeah, Eric, we've got a couple of questions. First of all, I wonder if you could mention about when people will receive their summer phosphorus bottles.
Yeah, thanks. So summer phosphorus bottles, you will have not, if you enrolled in that parameter, you get them later in the summer, like middle summer is when we start to send them out. If I can recall, there's some depends, but it'll usually be in July.
Great, thanks for that one. And then another question, can you sign up only for summer phosphorus? Because I'm not sure I can get to the lake in time for spring ice out.
Yes, so you can sign up, they're not bundled, so you can sign up just for spring, just for summer, or spring and summer. And yes, that is often the case. If you cannot make it to your lake during if you're not up there in February or March, you do not have to choose that parameter.
Thanks, Eric. And then there's been a couple of questions about people noticing that they have more than one field ID for their lake. I know we touched on that before. And what I've been suggesting for folks is that they should contact us directly, and we'll
Yes.
take a look at those different field ID numbers and advise you on which one to use.
Perfect. Yep.
All right. Another question from Sherry. What do you do about getting out to the deepest area without a boat? Is a kayak okay for that?
Yes. So for this one, if you are comfortable leaning over your kayak, because remember, you're not collecting, you're not holding the bottle like this. I really wish I had a bottle. And just scooping the surface. You do have to, we do ask you to put it down a foot or two below the water surface. And so if you're comfortable doing that in a kayak or canoe, you can definitely do it. Just please don't flip. We want you to be safe. And so don't push that. But yes, you can use a kayak or canoe, small boat, paddle boat, motor boat to collect your phosphorus.